Hello, sisters and brothers. Thank you all for being here. I'm Steve Capri, a full-time driver at UPS and a member of Teamsters Local 249 in Pittsburgh. I started part-time in 2019, and I transitioned to a driver a little over a year ago. I'm also an activist with Workers Strike Back because I deeply believe that a militant, rank-and-file class struggle strategy is what's needed from the labor movement to not only defend and regain rights we've won in the past, but also to win more and stronger rights for working people than we've ever seen before. I also believe labor, and particularly UPS Teamsters, in this moment, have a leading role to play right now in getting back to the methods that work. In brief, those are class struggle and union militancy. It's hard to overstate the choke point the logistics industry, led by UPS, represents for both the US and global economics. UPS ships around 3 and 6% of the US and global GDPs, respectively, which means that if we were to go on strike, not only would it cost as much as $180 million a day to UPS directly, but it would also damage the profits for the global billionaire class as a whole. That means UPS workers have enormous power and leverage over the company, while we also see the highest levels of support for unions in almost half a century. It's no coincidence that so many workers are getting organized and supporting other workers at the same time as wealth inequality skyrockets and workers' buying power remains stagnant due to steep inflation and low wage increases. Our wages need to outpace the rising cost of food, rent, gas, utilities, and so on. So, on to this contract. While there is a strong mood for a yes vote coming from the media and union leadership, there is also serious discontent among many workers, particularly part-timers who make up to 60% of UPS's workforce with the contract and the state of their pay and working conditions. In the event that the contract is voted down, while O'Brien's team goes back to the negotiating table, it will be on folks like us to begin pushing our local leaderships and convincing our union siblings to immediately hold regular parking lot meetings and practice pickets to both apply pressure and to prepare ourselves for a strike. There have been a lot of scare tactics around what danger to us workers a no vote could pose, but that's bullshit. The only real threat from a no vote is to UPS, and it would not automatically mean we'd go on strike. But if we do strike, it is not us who should fear it, but UPS, who stand to lose $1 billion a week, plus big accounts, and that's to say nothing of how much heat will be on UPS from the billionaire capitalists whose profits will be damaged when up to 6% of global GDP stops moving. Unfortunately, our Teamster leaders and UPS have banded together to create a media blitz that has convinced the public we've already won an all-time great deal. That, combined with the incredibly lowered standards and expectations of workers over the past 40 years, sets the stage for the contract to most likely be voted up and accepted. However, even if this TA passes, we can expect a significant no vote, and that will act as the basis for organizing in our union over the next 5 years. Those people who have higher expectations and are willing to stand up to pressure from the leadership are exactly the types of fighters we need. There will be many times the contract fails or workers' expectations are not met, or, despite our best efforts, the grievance process won't work out the way it should. And each of those will be opportunities to grow and strengthen this base, this struggle, this fight. We need to recognize moments like this aren't guaranteed, and we need to build ongoing structures to keep the momentum. Workers Strike Back can play a serious role in that ongoing fight. Despite a great deal of bluster from O'Brien about taking the fight to UPS, at the end of the day, the deal was done days before it needed to be. The contract is only mildly better than past ones that were so rightfully called out as sellouts and giveaways to the company. And it wins back nothing that was lost in the previous contracts. And UPS seems perfectly happy with the result. Now, even though we didn't see a real ounce of that fight that was talked about, we've got national and local leaderships telling us this is the best contract in labor history and treating a strike like a threat to the workers rather than the bosses. These kinds of fear-mongering and scare tactics have no place coming from a union leadership. So to respond to some of the claims I've heard, does voting no potentially hurt us or potentially going on strike hurt UPS workers? No. Voting no simply means you reject the tentative agreement, and it happens all the time. In 2021, John Deere workers voted down a weak contract offer and they won more. This year, railroad workers voted no multiple times and prepared to go on strike. They got a better deal. In 2018, as we all know, we UPS workers voted no on a weak tentative agreement. Unfortunately, our leaders at the time were allowed to undemocratically force the contract on us. That's why voting no needs to be linked to a plan to escalate and put pressure on the company, up to and including organizing a successful strike to force UPS to give us a better deal. I've heard people say UPS will go out of business if workers demand more. People mention yellow trucking going out of business, but do not blame workers for a massive corporate mismanagement. That's what caused Yellow's collapse. UPS itself reported record revenues of over $100 billion last year, making $13 billion in profits alone, in addition to the millions in executive pay. And all that money comes from UPS workers. Meanwhile, their main competitor, FedEx, is already talking about raising driver pay in order to keep qualified workers. And non-union packaging maker, Uline, is offering $29 an hour to start. UPS can well afford to pay starting wages of $25 an hour, catch-up raises, and to keep market rate adjustments. They have the resources to offer paid parental leave and retrofit all trucks with air conditioning by 2024. We should not settle for a contract that's acceptable to Wall Street, UPS executives, and shareholders. We should fight for the contract UPS workers deserve. So in order to win all we're asking for and more, what kind of a union do we need to be? Today, the dominant strategy of union leaders is what we call business unionism, which supposes that there can be an amicable agreement between owners and workers that benefits both sides fairly. That is built on a total lie, and we know that the reality is that bosses take every chance to lower wages, worsen working conditions, and increase productivity and profits, while undermining and ignoring the parts of the contract they're able to. We know that workers, not wealthy board members or corporate executives, who do the work that earns UPS's revenue, and that if we stop working, their money stops flowing. It's a zero-sum game, and there is one pile of money, and workers need a union that fights to take all that's possible, just like the company will do for themselves. Historically, it was much more common to see a different kind of union, one that didn't take a business unionist approach, but took a militant class struggle approach. They would say, as we should say today, labor is entitled to all that it creates. They were led by rank and file members in the workplace who didn't take more money than their coworkers and who didn't try to see eye to eye with the company, but instead used mass meetings, one-on-one organizing, and rallies to bond, educate, and prepare the members to go into battle with the company. Leaders that weren't afraid to take workplace action, up to and including strikes, either to hit back at the bosses when they try to encroach, as they always do, or in order to win the best possible contracts. Those are the methods that are so drastically needed today, and those are the methods that workers strike back champions because they are the methods that work. This is how we won changes that couldn't have been conceived of prior to their victories, not only at individual companies, but across industries and even across national laws. Workers striking and protesting with the weight of unions behind them is what won us the 40-hour work week, child labor laws, and the weekend. All of those protections have been quietly weakened or lost in the era of business unionism, including the weekend with UPS workers working on Saturdays and the new contract opening us up to working on Sundays as well. While Sean O'Brien ran opposed, the current president of the Teamsters, ran opposed to Hoffa Jr.'s selected successor, we have to remember that O'Brien was also a member of the Hoffa camp for years, including during the 2017 contract negotiations, where he was the lead negotiator on the terrible contract that the members voted down. He was let go by Hoffa following that, and only then began to position himself as a reformer, as he built his Teamster United coalition, which needed a left edge and a rank-and-file force to win. Instead of being open and honest about O'Brien's history and challenging him, the rank-and-file caucus, Teamsters for a Democratic Union, uncritically joined forces with him and subsumed themselves into the Teamsters United camp. They were united not around the best ideas of the two camps, but strong rhetoric with no change in basic business unionist principles. We need a force that can stand up to the leadership and even hold a strong leadership accountable. So it's really outrageous that despite losing some of their best left members, a long-standing opposition group like TDU is largely just going along for the ride. I think we should stay in touch, us folks here, as the TDU convention in October approaches, to talk about what we should push for. There are lots of good, energetic workers who are going to be there and who are looking for next steps and want an opposition to the failures of the leadership. And with TDU's leaders tied to O'Brien, they seem to have completely capitulated. We can begin to build an opposition force that can play the kind of role today that TDU once played in bringing rank and file democracy, which includes robust discussion and debate, into the Teamsters. Workers Strike Back can certainly offer support politically and in organizing those efforts. I think it's important to remember a bit of how we got to the situation we are in, where a company can rake in $23 billion in profits and stock buybacks in just 1 year, while some workers will only make $21 an hour. The past 40 years or so have been an era known as neoliberalism. And some of the core policies of neoliberalism, put in place by both Republicans and Democrats over that period, have been deep attacks on organized labor, on working conditions, and on the rate of wages keeping up with inflation. It has also meant offshoring of jobs to nations with the least worker protections, further driving down wages and conditions in the US, leaving US workers increasingly with mainly service industry jobs, which are often low paid and precarious. UPS and other aspects of shipping and logistics are among the jobs that are the least possible to send overseas, which increases our power and leverage. We need to use all that power and leverage to win for ourselves, but also to win for all the workers out there in desperate need of raises and better safety and quality of life. We cannot forget either that both big corporate parties champion NAFTA to ship jobs away, attacked Social Security and wages, empowered the for-profit healthcare industry, and privatized formerly public utilities and services, in addition to their banking deregulation and their trillions spent on blowing people up in other countries. All of this, as I mentioned, has meant lowered standards of living and working conditions for workers in the US and around the world, which has led to lowered expectations and hopes for what's possible. The highest poverty rates and rates of people living paycheck to paycheck are happening right now, alongside the largest percentage of wealth hoarded by a few people in history. As the largest workforce of the largest union in the country, we have a leading role to play in raising those standards higher than they've ever been. Workers deserve more than a slice of the pie. We made the whole damn pie. O'Brien has built an alliance with Joe Biden, and these kinds of relationships between corporate politicians and union leaders have always greased the wheels for business-friendly strategy. We need our leaders to be politically independent from the corporations, which means not getting in bed with either Democrats or Republicans, because both are wolves in sheep's clothing that represent the interests of big business against the interests of workers. We need to look no further than Joe Biden leading the way, as both parties in Congress preemptively broke the rail workers' strike a few short months ago. And despite this overtly and shamefully anti-worker move, our president, Sean O'Brien, lied and told Teamsters that Biden did not stop that strike, and otherwise has covered for Biden and the Democrats. So we have former opposition groups like TDU providing left cover for union leadership. We have union leadership providing left cover for corporate parties and their policies working against us workers. And then we get millions disenchanted with unions, the left, and pro-worker ideas, who then fall toward the poisonous lies of the growing right and far right, like Trumpism. There are no solutions to workers' problems in that direction either. And all right-wing division and conservatism only benefits the bosses and hurts the union and the workers. We need independent, unabashedly pro-worker leaders in our labor movement and in our union, and that is the kind of thing Workers Strike Back. and the organization that helped launch Workers Strike Back, Socialist Alternative, are advocating and fighting for. So we call on all unions, including the Teamsters, to break from the capitalist parties and endorse and support independent, pro-worker candidates and the building of a workers' party that refuses corporate money and interests. The last thing I want to say is, besides convincing every person you can to vote no before Tuesday morning, I want to implore folks here to continue the struggle forward. Use Workers Strike Back as a resource, but it will take all of us and a lot more folks like us who are willing to put in the effort, sacrifice the time and energy, stand up to the bosses, take our licks sometimes, but above all, fight unabashedly for our fellow workers and against the company. Whatever happens in this vote, we stand to win an absolute ton more next time around and really stand out as a beacon for workers everywhere. I appreciate your time, and I really look forward to hearing what folks here think, any questions they have for the room, any experiences in organizing over the past few weeks that they've had, any perspectives anyone might have for how things will play out, or any ideas or plans for how organizing beyond this contract battle. Thanks again, and solidarity.